Congratulations! You've just woken up in ancient India. Let's say somewhere between the 5th and 2nd centuries BCE, or perhaps during the Gupta period. The good news, you're about to experience a legendary chapter of history firsthand. The bad news, your chances of survival just drop dramatically. The first challenge hits you before you even open your eyes. The smell. Not the earthy, pleasant aroma of nature you might expect, but something far more pungent. The stench of unwashed bodies, animal droppings, and what might possibly be raw sewage hanging heavy in the air. You see, while daily bathing held ritual and religious significance in ancient India, it was far from modern hygiene standards. Soap usage was limited, and water use for bathing was often the same as that for drinking and cooking, increasing disease risk, especially in villages and smaller towns, where open defecation was common, and there was no systematic waste management. The stench could be so sharp it would kill your appetite as you drag yourself from your sleep, which is likely just a straw or grass-filled mattress, probably crawling with bugs or bed bugs. You realize how every muscle in your body aches. Life in ancient India meant constant physical labor from dawn until dusk. There were no weekends off, no vacations, and certainly no ergonomic considerations. Whether you were a farmer, artisan, or laborer, your body was your primary tool, used until it broke down. You might think you work hard in your modern life, but the labor here was something entirely different. Backbreaking work that left even the strongest people permanently hunched and arthritic by their 30s. Imagine spending 14 hours plowing fields, hauling water, chopping wood, or carving stones. No, one of the average lifespan was only about 30 to 35 years, and that was of those who survived the fatal diseases of childhood. Standing on the dusty floor, you notice the chill in the air. If it's winter, your hut might be near freezing inside. If you had a fire source, you'd have let it burn down overnight to save precious fuel. Good luck finding central heating or thermal underwear in this century. And if it's summer, well, get ready to sweat through every article of clothing you own. There was no escaping the elements in ancient India. During monsoons, huts would become damp, increasing the risk of insects and fungi. Speaking of clothing, forget comfort. Men typically own maybe 1 or 2 sets of clothes, a dhoti, and perhaps a kurta or angarka, made of rough cotton, chafing against the skin. Women wore saris or gagracolis, often in multiple layers regardless of the temperature. Everything was scratchy, ill-fitting, and rarely cleaned. The fancy outfits you've seen in movies? Pure fiction for the average person. Colors were made from natural dyes and faded quickly. Your stomach growls, reminding you it's time for breakfast. Hope you like dal, roti or bajra, and buttermilk, possibly for every meal. The ancient Indian diet was monotonous and nutritionally deficient. Fresh fruits and vegetables were seasonal luxuries, available for only a few months at most, and winter diets often contained no fresh produce whatsoever. This lack of dietary variety led to widespread nutritional deficiencies. Scurvy, a disease caused by vitamin C deficiency, when your gums bleed and your teeth fall out, was common among farmers, traders, and soldiers, despite being easily preventable with modern knowledge. You might think the water would at least be good, but river, pond, and well water was often contaminated with animal and human waste. Purification methods like boiling or filtering were known, but not always feasible or accessible. Before heading outside, you might want to check your shoes or sandals for scorpions or snakes that could have sought shelter during the night. It was not uncommon for people to shake out their footwear each morning, a habit born from painful experience. One wrong move, and you could be facing a venomous bite miles from any medical help. Stepping outside your hut, you're immediately aware of how exposed you are. The vast landscape of ancient India was breathtaking, sure, but it was also unforgiving. Extreme weather could appear with little warning. Drought, floods, extreme heat, or sudden downpours could all mean death for the unprepared. The sky might be clear now, but that could change in minutes. If you've settled in an ancient Indian village or town, you might think civilization offers some protection. In some ways, that's true. In others, it just presents different dangers. Towns and villages in ancient India were hotbeds of disease. Without proper sewage systems or understanding of germ theory, illnesses spread rapidly through communities. Cholera, typhoid, smallpox, diphtheria, and tuberculosis were constant threats. An outbreak could wipe out half a town in weeks. Speaking of towns, let's say you decide to visit one today. As you approach, you notice there's a distinct lack of the organized layout you might expect. Many ancient towns grew haphazardly, with buildings constructed wherever convenient, often without proper planning or infrastructure. The streets aren't paved, but are instead dirt tracks that transform into mud pits when it rains and dust bowls when it's dry. The smell hits you again, stronger. Now horse manure, cow dung, and other animal droppings are everywhere because animals are the main transportation. There are no street cleaners or sanitation departments. In some towns, the accumulated waste could be knee-deep in heavily trafficked areas. Flies swarm around you, and you realize why disease spreads so easily here. As you walk down the main street, you pass by a temple, a market, or the house of a wealthy merchant. Contrary to glamorous depictions, markets were not sparkling places. Most were crude, made of mud or wood, selling basic goods and food. The items sold often came from distant regions, and there was always a risk of spoilage during travel. Adulteration was also common, especially in food and medicines. Another deadly aspect of ancient Indian life was violence. Whether it was gangs of dacoits, local disputes, or wars between kings, violence was a constant threat. Ancient texts themselves describe gangs of robbers and their ambushes on travelers. These dacoits often lay in wait on deserted roads, and encountering them could be fatal. Speaking of being armed, you'll notice almost everyone carries a weapon of some kind, but not for the reasons you might think. While personal protection was certainly a factor, weapons were primarily tools for hunting, protection from wildlife, and sometimes for self-defense. The constant threat from bears, wolves, tigers, leopards, and venomous snakes made going unarmed foolish, especially when traveling between settlements. You might be surprised to learn that some ancient Indian kingdoms actually had strict weapon control laws. Visitors were sometimes required to surrender their firearms when entering town limits. Even epics like the Ramayana and Mahabharata describe strict rules and ethics of war, but in common life, quick skirmishes, land disputes, and personal feuds were common and often turned fatal. The romanticized gunfights of modern movies were rare. Most violence was impulsive, messy, and over trivial matters. As you continue your walk, you pass the local Vaidya's doctor's office. Medical care in ancient India would horrify you. Most Vaidyas had little or no formal training, although medical systems like Ayurveda and Siddha were quite advanced. Surgical procedures were performed without effective anesthesia beyond some herbs or alcohol, and sterilization was virtually unknown. Something as simple as an infected cut could lead to amputation or death. Common treatments included bloodletting, mercury compounds, and other toxic substances that often did more harm than good. Women in childbirth faced mortality rates as high as 1 in 4 in remote areas. Dentistry involved extraction without anesthesia, using crude tools. Most people suffered from painful dental issues for years before finally losing their teeth. If you were injured or fell ill in ancient India, your survival often depended more on luck than medical intervention. Even minor injuries could become life-threatening due to infection. Broken bones might never heal properly, leaving people with chronic pain and disability. The famous phrase, "only the strong survive," had literal meaning in ancient India. Your stomach growls again, reminding you it's time for lunch. You head to the local eatery, which is likely just an extension of someone's home, where meals are served for a fee. The food isn't any more varied than your breakfast. Meat is tough and often spoiled. Despite heavy spicing or salting, vegetables, if available, are overcooked to mush. Food safety standards don't exist, so dysentery and food poisoning are common occurrences. While eating, you overhear conversations about recent dacoit attacks, disputes with neighboring villages, or the danger of traveling alone. As for dacoits, they were a genuine threat, particularly in remote areas. Law enforcement was sparse, with a single guard or chief sometimes responsible for thousands of square miles. In many places, justice was handled through gram panchayat or traditional council action rather than formal legal proceedings. Mob violence was common, and the concept of innocent until proven guilty often didn't apply. If you were accused of theft, You might find yourself hanging from a tree before sunset, regardless of your actual guilt or innocence. After lunch, you decide to visit the local market or shop to stock up on supplies. The prices shock you. Basic necessities cost far more here than in eastern cities due to the difficulty and expense of transportation. A simple measure of dal or grain might cost the equivalent of $20 in today's money. Many villagers spent most of their income on essential supplies, with little left over for comfort or luxury. The shop offers another glimpse into ancient Indian reality: isolation. Mail delivery was infrequent and unreliable. Newspapers, if any, might be weeks or months out of date. Information traveled slowly and unreliably, often distorted through retelling. You might go years without news from family back east. Many people never saw their relatives again after moving. The psychological toll of this isolation contributed to high rates of depression, alcoholism, and suicide among the rural population. As the afternoon wears on, you notice dark clouds gathering on the horizon. Weather in ancient India wasn't just uncomfortable, it could be deadly. Without modern forecasting, storms arrive with little warning. Drought could wither plants before harvest. Torrential rains could wash away seedlings or flood fields. Early frost could kill crops just before harvest. Grasshoppers descended in biblical swarms, consuming everything green in their path and sometimes even eating the handles of tools left in fields. If you were lucky enough to have a proper home, it provided minimal protection. Most rural dwellings were hastily constructed from whatever materials were available. These were mud or thatch houses that leaked when it rained, harbored insects and snakes, and crumbled without constant maintenance. None were particularly effective against extreme weather. Winter temperatures inside could drop below freezing. Summer heat was often unbearable. As the storm approaches, you decide to head back to your hut before it hits. On the way, you pass a group of men heading to work at the local mine or quarry. Mining was one of the deadliest professions in ancient India. Underground cave-ins, toxic gas exposure, explosions from improperly handled blasting powder, and machinery accidents claimed countless lives. Workers also suffer from long-term health issues like silicosis from rock dust or various metal poisonings from processing ores. Even if you avoided immediate catastrophes, few ancient occupations were safe. Farming involved dangerous equipment with no safety features. Animal husbandry meant working with unpredictable animals weighing hundreds of pounds. Whatever you did to make a living, your risk of serious injury or death was exponentially higher than in the modern world. You make it back to your hut just as the rain begins to fall. The roof leaks in several places, and you place buckets to catch the water. This is a good opportunity to refill your drinking water. As clean water was scarce and precious, many villagers drank from the same sources used for washing and watering livestock, leading to waterborne illnesses that could quickly turn fatal. As you sit in your leaky hut, listening to the rain, you reflect on how different reality is from the romanticized version you might have imagined. There were no heroes or villains, just people struggling to survive in incredibly harsh conditions. The fact that anyone made it through is testament to human resilience and determination. Night falls early as you have no electricity. Candles and oil lamps provide minimal illumination, and you're careful with them. Fire was a constant danger in ancient homes. A single spark could mean losing everything, with no fire department to call for help. Many villages burned to ground at least once in their history. You prepare for bed, exhausted from just one day in ancient India. Your muscles ache, your stomach is unsettled from the unfamiliar food, and your mind is overwhelmed by the constant vigilance required to stay alive. As you drift off to sleep, you wonder if you'll make it through tomorrow, or if you'll become just another statistic in the dangerous story of the Indian subcontinent. The wind howls outside your hut, a haunting reminder of how small and vulnerable humans are against the vastness of the untamed wilderness. Tomorrow, if you're lucky enough to see it, will bring all these challenges again, along with new ones you haven't yet imagined. In ancient India, survival was never guaranteed. It was earned day by day, hour by hour, through hardship most modern people can scarcely comprehend. The morning light filters through the cracks in your hut walls, waking you from a restless sleep. Your body aches from a hard mattress, But there's no time to linger. Ancient India waits for no one. As you rise, you remember yesterday's harsh introduction to ancient life and wonder what new challenges today will bring. Let's say you decide to leave town today to travel across the land. Whether you're heading to another settlement, joining a pilgrimage, or simply exploring, travel in ancient India was an entirely different experience than what you're used to. Unless you were relatively wealthy or traveling between major cities, you probably couldn't afford to use the more comfortable options. Most people travel by bullock cart, horse, or simply on foot. If you own a horse or a bullock cart, consider yourself fortunate. They were expensive to buy and maintain, putting them out of reach for many. A good bullock might cost the equivalent of several months' wages. Then you needed harnesses, feed, and veterinary care, though veterinary care often meant shooting the animal if it broke a leg or developed certain illnesses. Riding itself was no pleasure cruise. Saddles weren't designed for comfort, but for function. Hours in the saddle left even experienced riders with blisters and aching muscles. And if your animal spooked at a snake or sudden noise, which happened frequently, you could easily be thrown, potentially suffering broken bones, or worse, miles from any help. If you couldn't afford a cart or animal, you might travel by foot. Forget the romantic image of pioneers cheerfully rolling across pristine prairies. Walking long distances was brutally uncomfortable. Roads, if they existed at all, were typically just dirt tracks carved by previous travelers. After rain, they became muddy quagmires where carts could sink axle deep. During dry periods, the dust was so thick you could barely breathe or see. Carts frequently broke down, with wheels cracking or axles snapping miles from the nearest settlement. Let's say you decided to undertake a long journey, perhaps a pilgrimage to a sacred site or a trade expedition. This was one of the most perilous undertakings of the time. Thousands of people perished on such journeys. Crossing rivers presented another deadly challenge. Carts weren't designed to float, but people had to cross numerous rivers on their journeys. Some had ferries or fords, but many required the cart to be floated across like a makeshift boat. Carts frequently capsized in these crossings, drowning people and livestock and destroying precious supplies. Contrary to popular belief, attacks by tribal groups or forest dwellers were relatively rare. However, dacoits were a very real threat, particularly in remote areas. Dacoit gangs actively robbed travelers, merchants, and pilgrims. These attacks were often ambushes, leaving little chance of escape. Firearms accidents were shockingly common, as most travelers were inexperienced with weapons but carried them for hunting and protection. The psychological toll of the journey was immense. Families buried children, parents, and spouses along the way, then had to continue traveling immediately. There was no time for extended grief on the trail. Each day's delay meant less chance of reaching their destination before unfavorable weather made passes impossible. The constant stress, grief, and physical hardship led many travelers to mental breakdown. Suicide was not uncommon among long-distance travelers. If you somehow survived the journey to your destination, your challenges weren't over. Many arrived having spent all their money and resources on the journey itself. Families often arrived destitute, malnourished, and ill, only to find that the promised land had its own harsh realities. But let's say you've decided not to travel that far. Perhaps you're heading to a nearby town or settlement instead. Even short journeys in ancient India presented significant dangers. Travelers might encounter dacoits who saw lone riders or small groups as easy targets. While the frequency of such robberies might be exaggerated in later fiction, they did occur regularly enough to be a legitimate concern. The natural environment posed constant threats to travelers. Flash floods could wash out trails or trap unwary travelers. Summer heat in desert regions could kill through dehydration and heat stroke. Winter cold routinely trapped travelers, sometimes leading to freezing deaths. Navigation itself was challenging in an era before detailed maps. Travelers relied on vague directions, landmarks that could change or be misidentified, and the experience of guides who sometimes proved unreliable. Getting lost in the wilderness could be a death sentence, especially if your supplies ran low. As you travel today, you notice another aspect of ancient Indian life that movies rarely depict accurately: the stunning diversity of people. Ancient India wasn't populated solely by a single group. It was a meeting ground of cultures from around the world. Chinese immigrants traveled as Buddhist monks and scholars. Arab families traded along the western coast. Europeans, Central Asians, and various tribal groups all resided in this land. Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, and later Christians, Jews, and Muslims. Dozens of distinct tribal nations had called these land home for thousands of years before others arrived. This diversity, however, didn't mean equality or harmony. Social hierarchies and discrimination were common features of ancient life. Lower castes faced brutal discrimination and were often forced to take the most dangerous jobs for lower pay than upper caste workers. Landowners frequently seized property through legal manipulation or outright theft. Women's experiences on the ancient frontier differ markedly from Hollywood depictions. Far from helpless damsels or secluded homemakers of modern narratives, women performed incredibly demanding physical labor while navigating restrictive social expectations. On homesteads and farms, women not only handled traditional domestic duties like cooking, cleaning, childcare, and making clothing, but also worked in the fields, tended livestock, and defended the home when necessary. Their workday typically started before dawn and ended well after dark, with few if any days of rest. An ancient Indian woman might need to plow fields in the morning, deliver a neighbor's baby at midday, fight off predators threatening the livestock in the afternoon, and still prepare meals and care for her own children throughout. Many women became widows young due to the dangerous nature of life and had to manage farms or businesses alone while raising children. Despite their essential contributions, women had few legal rights. In most states, they couldn't vote, own property independently if married, or have custody of their children in the event of divorce. Domestic violence was considered a private matter, with little legal recourse available to victims. For unmarried women, options were severely limited. Teaching was one of the few respectable professions, though female teachers were paid significantly less than their male counterparts and were often expected to resign upon marriage. Some women found economic independence through running boarding houses, working as nurses, or establishing weaving or dressmaking businesses. Then there were the devadesis, or ganikas, women who worked in temple services or brothels. While later mythology romanticized these women, the reality was typically grim. Many entered the profession out of economic desperation after being widowed or abandoned. Physical abuse, drug addiction, and venereal disease were common hazards of the work. Even those who managed to earn substantial money found themselves socially ostracized and unable to transition to more respectable positions. As the day wears on and you continue traveling, you might wonder about law enforcement in this supposedly lawless land. The reality was complex and varied widely by location. Major cities and towns typically had some form of organized law enforcement, but vast rural areas had minimal, if any, official protection. Village heads or local king's officers were responsible for maintaining order across sometimes enormous territories. A single officer might be the only law enforcement for thousands of square miles, making regular patrols impossible. They relied heavily on deputizing ordinary citizens during emergencies, creating local posses to pursue criminals or respond to violence. Town marshals handled law enforcement within town limits, sometimes with a few deputies in larger settlements. These positions were often dangerous and poorly paid, attracting a mix of dedicated public servants and those who enjoyed the power the badge provided. In many remote areas, justice was handled through informal community action rather than official legal processes. Vigilante groups formed to address perceived threats when formal law enforcement was absent or ineffective. Sometimes these groups maintained basic order, but they could easily become vehicles for prejudice, personal vendettas, or mob violence. Most violence was mundane, impulsive, and often alcohol-fueled. Bar fights that escalated to fatal levels, domestic violence, and disputes over land or livestock were far more common than dramatic shootouts on dusty streets. Criminal punishment was harsh by modern standards. Hanging was a standard penalty for murder, rape, and sometimes theft, particularly of animals or valuable goods. Prisons existed, but were primitive facilities with high mortality rates from disease, violence, and poor conditions. Many communities preferred immediate execution to the expense of long-term imprisonment. As evening approaches, you decide to seek shelter for the night. If you're lucky, you might find a town with an inn or boarding house. Don't expect luxury. Ancient accommodations were basic at best. A typical room would have a simple bed, possibly infested with bed bugs, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and perhaps a chair. Bathroom facilities would be an outhouse in the back, shared by all guests. Privacy was minimal, with thin walls allowing you to hear your neighbor's every movement and conversation. In busier establishments, you might even share a bed with a stranger, a common practice to maximize capacity during busy periods. The sheets might not have been changed for previous guests, and lighting would be limited to candles or oil lamps. A night's lodging would cost a significant expense for many travelers, equivalent to several hours' wages for an average worker. Many chose to sleep in stables, barns, or simply under the stars to save money, despite the additional risks these options presented. If you were traveling through more remote areas, you'd likely camp for the night. This meant building a fire, assuming you'd find enough fuel, preparing a meal from your limited supplies, and sleeping on the ground with minimal protection from the elements or wildlife. Indigenous peoples, experienced travelers, and military scouts had sophisticated techniques for safe camping, but the average person often made dangerous mistakes. Proper fire management was literally a matter of life and death. A fire built too large could spark a prairie or forest fire that could consume thousands of acres in hours. One built too small might not provide enough warmth during cold nights, leading to hypothermia. Campfire cooking required skills most modern people lack, often resulting in meals that were simultaneously burnt and raw. As night falls fully and you prepare to sleep, the sounds of the ancient Indian darkness surround you. Jackals howl in the distance. Unfamiliar birds call. The wind whispers through grass or trees. For people accustomed to modern light and noise pollution, the profound darkness and strange sounds of wilderness nights often triggered intense anxiety. Many travelers slept poorly, not just because of physical discomfort, but from fear of the unknown dangers that might lurk in the darkness. Predators like wolves, bears, and big cats might investigate camps looking for food. Venomous snakes and scorpions sought warm places to rest, sometimes including a sleeper's bedroll. Even if no actual threats materialized, the psychological stress of constant vigilance took its toll. Diaries from the period frequently mention exhaustion, not just from physical labor, but from the mental strain of perpetual alertness. Modern people accustomed to locks, alarms, and the security of dense population would find the vulnerability of sleeping arrangements profoundly disturbing. As you drift toward sleep, you reflect on the day's journey. Travel in ancient India bears almost no resemblance to its sanitized, romanticized portrayal in later entertainment. It was grueling, dangerous, and uncomfortable beyond what most modern people could endure. The skills required, from basic survival to navigation without maps, to making emergency repairs, to handling animals and tools safely, took years to develop, and mistakes were often fatal. The darkness deepens, and the sounds of night creatures grow louder. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. If you survive the night, perhaps you'll reach your destination. Or perhaps you'll become just another unmarked grave along the trail. One more statistic in the perilous story of human endeavor. Ancient India forgave no weakness and offered no second chances. Every day survived was a victory against overwhelming odds.